Salute BookTube. Welcome to my channel. Thank you for being here. What else? Oh, Happy New Year, of course. It's a new year. Happy New Year to all, everybody watching this. Thank you again for being here. Seeing that it's a new month and a new year, what I usually do, at the beginning of every month or the end of the previous month, I do a reading wrap up. Just wrap up what I've read during the past month. Give you some of my ideas, not book reviews, just discuss the books that I read, what I thought about them, etc. So I've got a pile here from my December books, although the pile is small. Um Regulars of my channel will know just at the end of 2025, in November, I was traveling, so I read much less. I came back to a very busy December, so I also read less, but I just wanted to odd, um, finish odds and ends of reading projects in December because I want to start the new year with a clean slate. So my December reading is very small, mercifully very small. I think that means that this video hopefully will be very short. I know my last video was very long. Hopefully this one will be very short. Uh, because again, I didn't read too many books. Actually, just one work of nonfiction and two short novels or even novellas. So let's get into it. We'll start with the nonfiction. I read this by Michael Burleigh, The Best of Times, The Worst of Times, A History of Now. Again, regulars of my channel will know that this author it was a reading project at the end of 2025. I had 4 books, and there were 4 months left in 2025 in September, and I said I'd read the 4 books that I own of his, um, and just say that I've read this author. Although he's got other books, and his most famous book, which is about German ideology, Nazi ideology in the 1930s or the 1920s. I haven't read that book, but these books, well, Michael Burleigh, let me show you the other books. This is the first one I read. It's called Earthly Powers. I read in September. This is an ideological history of ideas of Europe in the 19th century. So really the French Revolution, really to the First World War. And then it was followed up by Sacred Causes, which is the 20th century, history of ideas of the 20th century. So it picks up at the First World War, goes through World War II. There's a lot of history of ideas and ideology means that the church. Michael Burleigh tries to make a big defense of the church during World War II, especially the Catholic, the Catholic Church, the Vatican. But then it goes a little bit after World War II as well. This one is more post World War II. It's the third one. It's Blood and Rage: A Cultural History of Terrorism. So this was written, I guess, close to after September 11th. So Michael Burleigh in this book takes a look at terrorism, the history of terrorism. It starts way back with Irish nationalism, Irish terrorism in the 19th century. But then it focuses a lot on post 20th century terrorism, especially because, well, he discusses the Irish in the 19th century. He discusses the Russian nihilists and the nihilists or the anarchists in the early 20th century. Then there's a break for the world wars, but then he goes back into, there's a lot of stuff about, obviously Islamic terrorism is the last part of this book, but then there's stuff also European terrorism in Italy, Germany, and then secular Middle Eastern terrorism in the 1970s. Also movements in the Western world, terrorist movements in the Western world, again, mostly in the 70s. So this is the culmination. This is mostly 21st century. So this is really from September 11 to about 2017. This book is a bit dated now. It's, I believe, from 2017. Yes, which is early Trump first administration. And it's basically Michael Burleigh just giving a snapshot of the world, the situation of the world at the roughly at 2016, what has happened in the first 15, 16 years of the 20th century. So there's a lot in here about the financial crisis in 2008, the Great Recession, I guess it's called now, Also, a lot about the Iraq War, the American invasion of Iraq, and the regime change that America enacted in Iraq. That's the overarching big two events in the early 21st century. But then he goes into more modern stuff, and basically up to the coming of that guy, Donald Trump, his first term in office. Um, Again, the title, "The Best of Times, the Worst of Times." You might, if you couldn't see this very well, you'd think this was the the quote is from Charles Dickens, I believe, "Tale of Two Cities." And Michael Burleigh explains why he chose this title, but it says, quoting, the title quotes Charles Dickens' "The Tale of Two Cities" to the effect that we are living in the best and worst of times. It's Michael Burleigh trying to be smart. This is an author who, if you can see, his books are very large, and they go. His other book, the one about terrorism, is really large. He likes to just go on and on and on, and he likes to show his reader that he tries to show his readers that he's the smartest guy in the room, the smartest guy who's ever walked on planet Earth. What he does in his books, he overdoes it. He tries to cover a lot of either ideas or a lot of historical eras, or here this one, which is more, it's much more of a history of now. It's more of just a look at the world in the present being 2017 when this was published. He doesn't focus on one region. He tries to focus on the entire world. And it shows in this book. So, for example, the first chapter is actually, let me just see, is called Gulf Rivals, and that's the Arabian or the Persian Gulf. So there he talks about Saudi Arabia and Iran and just that whole part of the world. Chapter 3 is the Islamic State, ISIS. Chapter 4 is the Sick Man of Europe. It's a chapter devoted to Turkey. Chapter 5 is Russia under Putin. The title is Failed Nation, ? 6 is China, a country for old men. Chapter 7 is the USA, the noisy nation, and that's because of Trump. He'd just been elected, and he's a very noisy individual. And then chapter 8 is Empire, Virtue, the European Union. So his chapters on the Middle East, there are some chapters where you can tell he knows what he's talking about. That's his area of expertise. There are others which in this book looks rushed. It looks like after he's written these previous books, and he's become a well-known kind of best-selling author, that he no longer needs to put in as much work. So I think the chapters about the Middle East, the chapters about China, I think he got an assistant, probably a student, on a volunteer basis, unpaid, to do the research for him, to collate the research, to probably put together, put all the facts together, and then he just maybe did some light editing and then put it in this book. Because the chapter about the Gulf, the chapter about China, it reads like a report, like a report you would give as a briefing, maybe a CIA report or just a country fact file, more than it does, engaging writing or providing. I don't know. That's what I thought. I wasn't too impressed, but it looks like he's more of his chapters on Europe, which he's a specialist. I think Europe is his specialty. He's British, and there was the whole Brexit and the whole. This was the time of Brexit and all of that stuff. So he's much more knowledgeable about Europe. He's much more. The chapter on Turkey was surprisingly good. I don't know where he gets his Turkish expertise from, but it looks like he's probably done a lot of journalism, and this is just a collation of his journalistic writings that he's put into a book. But again, the chapters on China, on Middle East, and not so much. His chapter on the USA, again, he's a specialist on Europe and to an extent USA. He says he lived in USA for a period, so he knows. But yeah, that's basically what I thought of this book. Again, you can see on the title, on the cover, you can see Xi Jinping of China, Vladimir Putin, and Donald Trump. This is again before Donald Trump V2. This is before October 7th in Gaza. This is before the Ukraine war, or the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And this is before COVID as well. So you got to keep that in mind. It's a bit dated, but um, I'm kind of glad Michael Burleigh, I've got him out of the system. But there was one more thing again about Michael Burleigh and his personal biases, his personal ideology. It became quite obvious to me from reading his earlier books, these ones, that he's more on the conservative bent, he's more of a right winger. But then in this book, he's definitely anti-left, but then he was anti-Brexit. He was for Britain remaining in the EU. He makes it quite clear here. He's has a lot of mocking things to say about Donald Trump, that he's this buffoon TV personality who found himself in the White House. Although, again, this was first Trump. And then he makes a lot of... what he argues, especially in his chapter on Europe, is that the old established parties of Europe that have been around since the end of World War II, those are crumbling. There's new populist governments coming to Europe. So he mentions what's happening in France with the far right, in Hungary, the whole Orban movement in Hungary, that kind of thing. Rise of just, populist new parties coming up in Europe that have, over... what's the word, that has run over the old ways. The usual business as usual in European politics is ending, and there's new populist governments, and he seems to be for that. Although, again, I found at the end of the book he has his conclusion, and I found again, there's he Michael Burleigh can't help but try to show that he's the smartest person in the room. And then he tries to put, how do you say this? He puts in his writing, there's just silly little additions he puts of his own personal, little slight digs that he puts, very, very under the radar, very passively, but it's there. Because I'll just, before I show the quote in this book, I wanted to give you an example from the book, for one of his last books, which I found the same thing. And these are, what's the word? Pro-Nazi? I don't know. They're just, let me read. It says, in this book, in the introduction to this book, he's talking about Muslims in Europe. He's talking about the threat of terrorism, of Islamic terrorism in Europe, the problems of integrating Muslims in Europe. And then he has this line here. He says, it says here, Muslim constituents are not ready to tolerate infinitely those who wish to eradicate homosexual, reduce women to second-class citizens, or openly call for the murder of Danish cartoonists, Dutch politicians, or Jews and Israelis, activities that may be acceptable in Saudi Arabia or Iran, but which are not all right here. Okay, and then he writes here, this is a very strange line. He says, anyone with those views is irreconcilable with our civilization and should take the opportunity to leave before Europe's history repeats itself. So basically what he was writing there was, beware Muslims in Europe. If you don't accept our civilization, or you don't accept our will, we will do to Muslims in Europe what we did to European Jewry. We'll do to European Islam what we did to European Jewry in the Second World War, which was, again, that was odd, and that really turned me off from this author. And then here on this book, which I read this month, there was another, it's a slight one, but it's there. It's much slighter than the one I just read, but I read that one just to give you context. Here, he's talking about Europe, and he's talking about how the European militaries, because Donald Trump was saying that Europeans have to increase their military spending, America just can't defend them on the cheap, on their dime, that Europe's going to have to step up and pay more for their military spending. So he's talking about European military, and let me read the quote. It says, "Many European nations have proud military histories. Think randomly of the Vikings, Spanish conquistadors, Napoleon's imperial guards, the French Legion, the French Foreign Legion, excuse me, and the British Royal Marines commandos. Collectively, Europeans, in quotation mark, have been formidable, though we would probably celebrate the Roman legions more than the multinational Waffen SS that invaded the Soviet Union in 1941. Let me read that again. It says, though we would probably celebrate the Roman legions more than the multinational Waffen SS that invaded the Soviet Union in 1941. It says, along with regular forces from Germany, Finland, Italy, Spain, and Romania that bulked out the Wehrmacht. Again, probably celebrate the Roman legions more than the multinational Waffen SS. Again, he puts these little slight, annoying little lines into his conclusions, his personal biases. He just puts it, he lays it out there. So probably we should also take pride in the Waffen SS because it was made up of a coalition of Europeans, not just Germans, but there were Romanians and Spanish and Italians. And what was the other nationality he put there? Poles. I lost the page now. Italy, Spain, Finnish. We should probably, the Wehrmacht, be careful Russia, or be careful whoever wants to threaten Europe. Previously, we had a all-invading German army that was very powerful, and again, I don't know what he meant there, but it was strange because bringing the Waffen SS as an example of what European militaries can do is a bit much. And just to remind you, Mr. Michael Burleigh, that the Waffen SS lost the war. They were defeated by the Soviet Union. The Wehrmacht did very well invading small countries like Belgium and the Netherlands and Norway. They did very well there. But when it came to Russia and the Soviet Union, the Wehrmacht were destroyed. They were annihilated. They were defeated. So anyway, I don't know what to make of this book. I don't know what to make of Michael Burleigh. I'm glad I was picking up his books. I kept seeing them and seeing them. I noticed that I had 4 of them, and they were almost in chronological order. I said I'd make a reading project out of it. I'm just glad that I'm done with it now, and I can not think about it anymore. But then we go to the next thing I read in December last month. Actually, there are 2 books, and they're in the same anthology that I have here. It's Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and Bram Stoker's Dracula. Actually, I read Bram Stoker Dracula first. I was supposed to read this as a read aloud on Steve Donohue's channel. It started in October. It got pushed to November. It was completed in November, but it was supposed to be a Halloween read. But in November I was traveling. I couldn't complete it, so I only completed it by the end of December. I had done half in October and then read the second half in December, basically, with a long gap in November. But Dracula, I was a bit critical when I mentioned this when I first announced that I was going to be reading this, because I read the half of it. I was a bit critical, but it's hard to be critical because it's a classic, and especially as the story progresses, it's just a fun reading experience. Of course, this is the second time I've read Dracula, so maybe that clouded my opinions, because I sort of knew what was going to happen. And then Dracula and the whole vampire sort of story is overplayed. So I don't know. I guess that sort of clouded my opinion of Dracula. But as Steve Donohue was saying in his read aloud, you should try to read this as if you were a 19th century Victorian person reading this for the first time. And it was quite a revolutionary book for its time. It was so different, and a lot of the first half of the story happens in Transylvania, in Romania, and in Count Dracula's castle, his fortress. But then the second half is very much in London and in the UK. So British readers at the time were probably very spooked because a lot of the locations were places that they would walk by every day. So obviously it was at the time, and it's definitely withstood the test of time. It's still incredibly popular. I just wanted this anthology. It's all you might be asking. It's got an introduction by Stephen King. Just although I didn't read that introduction, but once I was reading Dracula and I was sort of 50-50 on it, I remembered that I'm much more of a Mary Shelley Frankenstein fan. And I said, look, Frankenstein is right there. It's in the same book. And I was doing very little reading. These are the only, I was reading the Michael Burleigh, and I was reading Dracula. And not even all of Dracula, just half of it. And I had a lot of extra reading time. 2 books is really nothing for us intense readers. So I said, let me add Frankenstein. It's about 200 pages. Frankenstein. I can knock it out really quickly. And boy, I am definitely a Frankenstein fanboy. You asked me the eternal debate between, is it Frankenstein or Dracula? Which one is which one do you prefer? Which one is better? I'm in the Frankenstein camp. I'm sorry for any Dracula fans out there. Dracula is good, don't get me wrong, but if I had to choose, for me, Frankenstein. Dracula is really good because Bram Stoker had a theater background. He worked in the theater, and the story is very theatrical, and that's why it's done really well in film. The whole Dracula story. There's so many films about Dracula and vampires, but Frankenstein. Also popular in film, etc. But the writing, Mary Shelley's writing, is just something to behold. It's really, really incredible, especially after reading Bram Stoker. I mean, there are so many examples I could give, but maybe I'll give a couple of examples. Here's Mary Shelley on death, on the subject of death, because to understand Frankenstein, you also have to understand a little bit of Mary Shelley's background. She had a lot of grief in her life, so she was qualified to write about grief and death. Here's an example. She done. Let me start at. Here he is talking, or she. Here she is. Talking about death. I need not describe the feelings of those whose dearest ties are rent by that most irreparable evil, the void that presents itself to the soul and the despair that is exhibited on the countenance. It is so long before the mind can persuade itself that she whom we saw every day and whose very existence appeared a part of our own can have departed forever, that the brightness of a beloved eye can have been extinguished, and the sound of a voice so familiar and dear to the ear can be hushed, never more to be heard. These are the reflections of the first days, but when the lapse of time proves the reality of the evil, then the actual bitterness of grief commences. That's, again, maybe I didn't read it very well, but it's really, really powerful stuff. Just really excellent prose. And then just right after explaining the grief of death, Mary Shelley, just in the next sentence, describes how we have to get over grief. That if we keep grieving, that's not good either, that we really need to move on. So let me read that quote. It says, yet from whom has not the rude hand rent away some fear? Let me restart that. Yet from whom has not that rude hand rent away some dear connection? And why should I describe a sorrow which all have felt and must feel? The time at length arrives when grief is rather an indulgence than a necessity. And the smile that plays upon the lips, although it may be deemed a sacrilege, is not banished. My mother was dead, but we still had duties which we ought to perform. We must continue our course with the rest and learn to think ourselves fortunate while one remains whom the spoiler has not seized. So basically that's Shelley there saying, okay, there's a grieving part, but then over-grieving is an indulgence. It's time to smile again after a period of grieving, of course. And that it affects us all. Who hasn't been affected by death? To grieve, to over-grieve, is just not worth it, and we have to move on. There's just two little things I wanted to mention there. The word, it says right at the end it says, we learn to think ourselves fortunate while once remains whom the spoiler has not seized. Those are us that are still alive. The spoiler still hasn't seized us and taken us away. But she uses the word spoiler, and the spoiler is a small s, it's not a capital S. Some people would say who God had taken away, or the Lord had taken away. But Mary Shelley says the spoiler. She doesn't go about. She doesn't explain who the spoiler is. Um, I thought that was interesting. Again, Mary Shelley writing in the Enlightenment. This is a time of great enlightenment, great rationalism. Uh, there's examples throughout the book, but there was the other one. She uses the other. It says, "Yet from whom has not that rude hand rent away some dear connection?" Again, rude hand, not some God or the Lord or who has God. No, it's the rude hand. Again, small letters, nothing too too flashy. When discussing a higher power. Again, I know there are religious people watching this. I'm not trying to be controversial. I'm just putting Mary Shelley in context. There are a lot of quotes. I mean, I could go on. This video is long, and I didn't want it to be long, but there are other examples about. I mean, I can go on and on. I won't. I'll wrap this up. I'll wrap this video up because I don't want it to go too long. But maybe I'll do a deep discussion of Frankenstein. If I get comments saying do a deep discussion of Frankenstein, I might make a separate video, go through the quotes, because I highlighted quite a few quotes. Maybe better if I prepare it and then make a separate video if it's requested, just going deep into Mary Shelley's excellent prose. I'm a new fanboy for Mary Shelley, for the Frankenstein story. I know there's a new movie directed by Benito del Toro that's out on Netflix. I'm gonna end this video and I'm gonna go watch it. I'll be excited to watch that. But really, what a book, what a story! Just flows like butter. Her prose is just excellent. I know it's a classic. I'm not releasing anything or discussing anything new or profound. But if you haven't read Frankenstein, you should. You should read Dracula too. You should also read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. But you tell me. For me, it's not even a competition. Just excellent writing. I enjoyed it very much. But yes, again, I don't want this video to go long. I'm gonna wrap this video up. I'm gonna say Happy New Year again. I hope a happy 2026 to you. I'll see you in the next video. Salute, BookTube.